button. We're just looking at two responses. That's all we need to know. You might get asked for one, you might be asked to compare and contrast, you might be asked for two responses. The first one we're looking at is the US. What did they do? They brought together an alliance, over 40 members. Their intention was clear: to invade Iraq, to remove Saddam. So their response was to go to war. This is an example of international cooperation, global actors working together to achieve a goal. So the response, the actual invasion, about 150,000 troops initially. The invasion was about taking control. The invasion was followed by an occupation. And I'm hoping that you've covered one or both of those elements in your reports. I'm sure you have. A key part of the occupation was that they set up a temporary government. So what did the US do? They invaded, they took control, they set up a temporary government led by an American. So unmistakably, they violated Iraq's sovereignty. It was a part of their response and the coalition of the willing. There's an example of the number of troops they committed. In contrast, the UN did something very different. In fact, it almost did the exact opposite. This is made really clear in this morning's reading. Kofi Annan says, from the start, the Security Council was not convinced that the UN should go to war. Germany didn't want to go to war, France didn't want to go to war. And Russia probably would have vetoed as well. And this cartoon captures that. You've got the French and the Germans walking away saying, Iraq, no. And the irony in George Bush's comment is he's pointing at France and Germany saying, what would France and Germany know about war? Ironic perhaps because those two countries were at war for a long, long time and suffered huge casualties during World War I and World War II. Perhaps they've learnt their lesson from war. Maybe these other countries going to war haven't learned a lesson. That might be what he's suggesting. So the UN could not agree. The Security Council did not agree that Saddam had violated the resolutions, and therefore they wouldn't approve UN military action.
Wait, did not agree that Saddam
had violated the resolutions.
Is this on my classes? Get my chat.
Yes, it is on my classes.
Are you recording this?
Yep.
Did you want us to send it to you?
Yeah, you can send it if you want. You don't have to, but by all means send that. So France and Germany made it clear from the start they were not going to authorise a military action. They said, we're going to veto it, we're not going to let it pass. So they discussed it and debated it for a long time, but the Americans never put it to a vote because the French said, we're not going to vote in favour of this. We don't believe military action is the right way to go.
Is this a response to the United Nations?
Yes. So United Nations is your heading. The French Foreign Minister, literally, this is a quote, we think that military intervention would be the worst possible solution. So he's not even giving it some hope. He's saying this is the worst possible solution to this problem. We've got a problem, we've got a guy, we think he's got chemical weapons. There are probably 100 different possible solutions. This is the worst. The region is already unstable. You've got Palestine and Israel. You've got Iran with nuclear weapons. Sorry, a nuclear program. You've got tension in Syria and Lebanon. You've got tension all over this region. You've got Afghanistan, which is at war at the time. The French minister is suggesting we shouldn't make this region more unstable. It's not a good idea. President Chirac himself, we're going to listen to him for a second.
Do you think now war is inevitable?
I hope it isn't. And I hope that it will not ignore the sentiments of the majority of nations across the world. Countries that are holding inspections work, especially as they are working.
Mr. President, what is your bottom line compromise?
If I wanted to leave, well, I'm not the one to say. The inspectors themselves have to tell us that a lot of progress has been achieved, that weapons are being destroyed every day. Of course, we haven't reached the full goal yet. I'm not going to accept any practical modalities that the inspectors suggest in that respect, especially as for their deadlines. Are we talking 1 to 2 months? I don't know. But we are ready. I am ready to find an agreement on these issues if it has the endorsement of the inspectors.
So you're saying you'd be prepared to do a 30-day or a 60-day deadline?
Tout ce que propose, whatever the inspectors propose and suggest in that respect will be accepted. It has to be accepted, I think. We have to disarm Iraq. We can't just leave that Iraqi dictator in a position where he can hold weapons that he uses. But we have to do it under the most reasonable conditions, the most normal conditions. And I think that today, as I say, we have to go through these inspections.
Britain, the United States have accused France of poisoning the process by saying that you would use your veto under any circumstances. Even in Iraq, newspapers loyal to Saddam Hussein are hailing, appraising the division in the world community, calling it a great victory for Saddam Hussein. Do you not think that your repeated vow to veto has emboldened Saddam Hussein?
France is not pacifist. We are not anti-American either. We are not just going to use our veto to nag and annoy the US. But just feel that there is another option, another way, a less dramatic way than war, and that we have to go down the path.
So his position is pretty clear. He said it right there. There is another way to solve this problem that doesn't involve war. And really that goes to the UN's response. So what did the UN do in response to this interstate conflict? The UN Security Council decided not to pursue a military action. And this is an example, we're about to see an example of crisis diplomacy, which is one of our key terms. It's the bottom of the screen, at the wall there. This is taken from the study design. Crisis diplomacy refers to negotiations between actors in the global political arena in response to crisis, most commonly concerning conflicts and other disasters. So when global actors come together to negotiate about a crisis. Now, unlike international cooperation, which is about global actors working together, mutual benefit, here the global actors might disagree. So when you've got the French and the Americans in the Security Council arguing about Iraq, that's crisis diplomacy. So diplomacy, talking, negotiating, and it's in a crisis. The crisis is Iraq may have these weapons. And I've got a short example of crisis diplomacy in action.
Begin by expressing my thanks for the special effort that each of you made to be here today. This is an important day for us all as we review the situation with respect to Iraq and its disarmament obligations under UN Security Council Resolution 1441. Last November 8th, this Council passed Resolution 1441 by a unanimous vote. The purpose of that resolution was to disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had already been found guilty of material breach of its obligations stretching back over 16 previous resolutions in 12 years. Resolution 1441 was not dealing with an innocent party, but a regime this Council has repeatedly convicted over the years. Resolution 1441 gave Iraq one last chance to come into compliance or to face serious consequences. No Council member present in voting on that day had any delusions about the nature and intent of the resolution or what serious consequences meant if Iraq did not comply. And to assist in its disarmament, we called on Iraq to cooperate with returning inspectors from UNLOVIC and IAEA.
You can watch the rest of that in your own time. That's part one. This is literally video footage of the Security Council. So they record their sessions and the important ones they make open to the public. And I think this is part 1 of 4, so it's about an hour, this particular session of the UN Security Council. It's not that dissimilar to what the girls who are doing the Anya debating have done. Now, Nikita and Fee, you did this last Sunday. Can you talk to the group about your example of crisis diplomacy? What was happening in the room?
In general, or?
Well, what were different states doing? What's an Anya debate involved?
We did one in Year 10.
Okay.
People standing up and just kind of trying to persuade people about
to vote with them.
Yeah.
with the issue.
in terms of what their state would do, who they're representing.
And what are the issues?
This year it was
Nuclear, North Korea,
North Korea
and nuclear.
sanctions.
Yeah.
The secret one was
And there was cyber warfare.
cyber warfare. And what was the secret one?
Extradition.
Extradition.
So these are set up as particular crises facing the global community. It's when one country sends you to another one who's requested you. So they say, you've done something bad in England when you were on holidays there last year. England wants you back so they can charge you with a crime. Australia would grab you and send you over to England. When one government requests... You'll be fine. So this is our example of crisis diplomacy. It's a perfect example, but it also helps us understand what happened with regards to the start of the war. If you haven't already, open your vocab list now, update your definition for crisis diplomacy, and fill in the example. So you've all got area of study for vocab list. Crisis diplomacy is one of your terms, update it now. I hope everyone has the
arguments between the French and the
That's your example. So, look, you can just use a broad example, like any time the UN Security Council meets to discuss an issue, but we've got a specific one that you could actually elaborate on. You know, you might get if you got a 5-mark question about crisis diplomacy, you guys would be fine. What's the question?
What's the example?
It's the
Just the France and
it's the discussion about what to do with Iraq.
Okay.
That whole thing, the disagreement between the US and France and weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah,
I beg your pardon? No way. You don't need the exact word. And the US in the Security Council. So Germany disagrees as well. It's any example of actors negotiating how to resolve a crisis. The UN Security Council meeting talking about what's in Iraq and the disagreement between the US That vocab list needs to keep getting updated. Each time you learn a new term that's in it, fill it in.
You were so tiny. Oh, what's the example of crisis?
We just saw one. No, you were in here when we saw the video. You were. Let me give you some keywords. UN Security Council. Weapons of mass destruction. Iraq, USA. Make your answer based on that. So, it's exactly what you're going to be doing on Sunday. That's an example of crisis diplomacy. Yeah, the UN Security Council is the example. And elaborate on that. You might be more specific and talk about the council arguing over Iraq, or just speak broadly about the Security Council as an example. All right, moving on. So, the UN didn't just say no, 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 or in the accent of the French, no, 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 no. Didn't get the response I was after. What they did do. Oh, is the acronym coming up? It is. This is a part of the UN's response. So in case you want to elaborate on the UN's response, if you do get a longer question, what they did actually do was they passed Resolution 1500 and they set up the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq, UNAMI. They love their acronyms. They always Word.
That's
They
you.
fit.
Why is this different to the one you've got on my page?
Yeah, I changed just a couple of small bits when I was checking over it this morning. So, so interestingly, this was the whole Security Council. They agreed they had to do something. So they said, okay, we can't just sit by while Iraq falls apart, because this was after the US had invaded, taken control. So they passed this resolution to provide support in these ways. Political support. How can we support the Iraqis achieve national reconciliation? Bring the different groups in Iraq together, because they were trying to kill each other at this point. Electoral support. So the UN tried to set up an electoral system, voting booths, political parties, a system to elect leaders for the new democracy. And thirdly, issues around the constitution. Reviewing the current constitution, trying to implement it so it was actually being enforced. You don't need that much detail. Even something like providing support in terms of elections and the constitution is enough. But this is what UNAMI was charged with, because they wanted to help fix the country after the war had happened. The other way they helped was in terms of development and aid. So UNHCR was still doing what UNHCR does. It was helping with refugees, setting up refugee camps, providing support. There's a 2-page article in your subject reader, which goes to exactly what UNAMI does. And here's a short video about someone talking about UNAMI.
How do you update the PowerPoint?
I can do that in a moment, yeah.
The UN came in with its own mandate. That own mandate has really taken more shape in recent years for the UN to act independent as an impartial advisor to the Iraqi people and the Iraqi government. Indeed, our mandate tells us that we ought to act at the request of Iraq. A few things come to mind, for instance, the election law that we helped put together by bringing really the political groups together around one table. It was very difficult to have a compromise. It's important to note that the effectiveness of the Iraqi security forces has definitely increased. All the training efforts and investments that have helped them to strengthen their hands. And we believe actually that the Iraqi government will be quite capable in the next few months when the US forces will roll down to around 15,000 to be in charge of security as they are already for a long period of time. I interact a lot with Ambassador Hill and his team on the political analysis as to what's going on, just comparing notes, and understanding the vision and differences of responsibilities, but still a common objective shared by all Security Council members with the US. So those that want to see a strong UN presence in Iraq also will have to accept that it comes with a price, and that's what we're going to discuss with the membership. Looking at the budget for next year, and ultimately hope that we get support of the membership of the US and other countries for doing that.
So the UN could easily have just rubbed its hands and said, America, this is your problem now. We didn't authorise action. We didn't start the war. We didn't put Iraq into chaos. You guys are going to pay for this. You're going to fix it. Instead, they're in there trying to fix the problem. And in fact, there was a huge attack on the UN mission, and they lost the chief of the mission and about 88 staff, I think, in one bombing. So they were under fire as well during the civil conflict. But they saw, think about the purpose of the UN, peace and security. They didn't cause this problem, they're going to help fix it. They're going to use aid money from donor countries like Australia and other countries. They're going to go in there and try and bring some stability to the region, to the country. So two really different responses. One, war is an instrument of the state. violence, justified violence. Another one is about peace and security, avoiding war at all costs. So if you do get a compare and contrast question, this is a great one to use, interstate war instead of terrorism, because the two responses are so different. And in this one, you could perhaps say that, in fact, the UN, if you were evaluating its success, you could say the UN has been very successful because its aim was to provide aid to people, to support them, to try and bring them closer to stability.